Hi there again, BookTube Lola here, and welcome back to my channel, Lola's Library. Today I'm going to bring to you a video about all the books that I've read in September. Basically have a little catch up with you, do a few mini kind of reviews over the books I've read over the month of September, and yeah, give you a quick update basically. So first off, a book that I don't have on me currently because I borrowed it from the library and have taken it back, was The Sleeper in the Spindle by Neil Gaiman, which was a really good book actually. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And the story of The Sleeper in the Spindle takes place, it's actually more about Snow White than it is about Sleeping Beauty. Basically, Snow White has been swept up into this world where she's having to marry a man that she doesn't really know. He's just kissed her and woke her up. Well, they haven't really got to know each other, but they've got to get married soon. And so she's quite anxious and worried about that, so she wants to go on her own new adventure, and she hears about Sleeping Beauty and this like sleeping spell that's been cast over her city, like Sleeping Beauty City, and she goes out to try and rescue Sleeping Beauty. And this, this information she gets from her dwarf friends. Now Snow White is actually quite a feisty, funny character. The story is quite quick paced, it's not very big at all, it's got lots of beautiful illustrations in it. Like I said, she's feisty. She casts off her wedding dress and gets suited up in her armour and a sword and kitted up. She's very brave. So yeah, basically Snow White sets off to rescue Sleeping Beauty from her endless sleep, and there's a few twists and turns along the way, and basically Snow White rescues Sleeping Beauty instead of it being a princess it typically would be. So yeah, I rated that a 4 out of 5 stars. It's very engaging, it's not flowery, it's very to the point and direct. There is, some weird dark humour in there, which I quite liked. The only downside to this, which typically does happen in a lot of fairy tales because they are very quick paced and short, is that there isn't exactly a massive amount of world or character building. So the only characters that you get to know are Snow White and her dwarf friends. You don't really get to know much about Sleeping Beauty as a character, or even the villain really. That's the only downside to it though, and that's why I gave it a 4 instead of a 5. But I did actually really enjoy the story. The next book I read in September was Gemini. This is a reread for me. I absolutely adore this book. It's by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This book is written in a multimedia format. It's like in messengers like Whispernet, it's in journal entries. This is the second book in a series. It's got all different kinds of formats all the way through, and despite the quite chunky size of this book, it's actually a very quick paced book and you get through it very quickly. This time, instead of just reading it, I also audiobooked it, and the audiobook version of this is wonderful. I really enjoyed it. All the different voices and the different actors and just all the different people that put work into it were absolutely amazing. Obviously, as I've said before, the Aiden sections of these books are my favourite. I love Aiden, who is the artificial intelligence of the story. He is my favourite character by far in these books. The other characters are Hannah, Nick and Ella, who all try and work together to basically save the ship from invaders. So these people have come in and invaded the ship that they are currently on. I'm sorry about the light, the sun's just come out and it's shining through. But yes, they need to save the ship. They also have a virus coming into the ship that comes from the drugs that Nick is dealing, so basically the creatures that make the drugs. So they've got to fight a virus that is very life-threatening, as well as a load of people who invaded the ship and want to kill them. As well as later on, following on from Illuminae, having to save the people from Illuminate as well. So basically they've got an almost impossible task in this book, and they are amazing characters, and I really look forward to the third book of the series, Obsidio. And I also did rate that a 5 out of 5 stars, I loved it that much. I rated it 5 both times I read it. The other book I read, the third book I read in September, was Good Omens. Another reread, something I absolutely love. I love this story. It's basically about the Antichrist being switched at birth. And it's just such a funny book. It's by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett working together to make this very comedic book. Yeah, the Antichrist is switched at birth with a normal child, and for a lot of this child's childhood, Warlock is thought to be the Antichrist, and they are following him and sending many influences out to him to try and get him good or evil. So like Crowley, who is the demon, is trying to send horrible influences and make him evil, and then Aziraphale, who is the angel, is trying to send influences to make him good. And basically all this is pointless because the Antichrist isn't Warlock. It is a boy called Adam who is living quite a normal life somewhere else. So they have to try and figure out who the Antichrist is and then influence him, and send... Basically the Antichrist has got to bring about the apocalypse, and then there's like the 4 horsemen who come along to try and help with that, and then these 4 normal guys try and be other horsemen of the apocalypse and give themselves really ridiculous names and stuff like that, and to try and follow in the 4 horsemen's footsteps, but fail miserably in many ways. So I highly recommend, if you haven't already, to read Good Omens. It is such a quick paced and funny read. And again, I gave that 5 out of 5 stars both times. It is a wonderful book. The next book I read in September was this chunky book here, The Shadow Rising, which is the 4th book in the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. And another wonderful epic fantasy story following Rand and Perrin and Mat and Egwene and Nynaeve and all the other amazing characters in this series. Especially Loial. Loial is one of my favourite characters. Loial and Perrin are both my favourite characters. I love them. Basically, they've got to defeat the Dark One, who is basically the devil. He's trying to rise and basically end the world as they know it, so everybody would die and the cycle would start again, the wheel of time would turn from the beginning again, and the era that they know would end, time as they know it would end, and everything would restart again. So it's this epic battle between the Dragon Reborn and the Dark One still ongoing in the story, and there's loads of storylines, there's different storylines for different characters, and they're very easy to follow. Very happy with this story so far, really want to carry on, so that I will. Another book which I've read this month, which I kind of surprised myself with, was A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. It's like the 2nd book I've ever read by Patrick Ness, and he is actually a very good writer. It's just not something I would normally personally read. Basically the premise of this story is, which has also been made into a film which I haven't seen yet, which I do want to see at some point. The main character is a young boy called Connor, and his mother, you know from the start, she has cancer, and he's having to look after her and be the grown-up in the situation, because she's got it quite bad, and it's something that he's got to come to terms with just as much as her, and something that's going to kill her eventually. Now, he's also being stalked by a monster, the title of the story basically, but this monster isn't everything that you originally think he might be. He is there to teach Connor how to move on and how to deal with the story that's coming, how to deal with his mother's cancer. Basically the monster's going to tell Connor 3 stories. In return, Connor's got to tell the monster the truth. And these stories that the monster has are all from situations exactly the same as this, or similar to this, where somebody had to give him a story in exchange. The monster is basically there to help him and not scare him or be evil in any way, shape or form, even though he does threaten to eat him a few times. The nightmare is something totally different than the monster. Connor ends up not really being scared of the monster because he's depressed, he's being bullied at school, and his mother's dying. He's just not in the right place, and the monster is basically there to help him. So it's a very, very wonderful and emotional story about a young boy who's got to cope with his mother having cancer and coming to terms with her having to die eventually, which is very, very sad. The final book I read this month, I had a lot of books from the library this month. Like three of the books I read this month have come from the library. I've read 6 books this month. The last book I read was The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. I'm really getting into his books, they are wonderful. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, it was just so good. And yeah, I have a new favourite character. Wayne from this story is so funny. He loves hats and he just loves being quirky and funny and sarcastic, and it's just, his wit is so fun. It's basically an investigation story set in a fantasy-esque world, kind of Victorian era, I think. So it's kind of a newish age fantasy. And I would call this a standalone from the Mistborn series. I'd call it like a kind of a side story to it rather than actual like main part of a series. It's set like 300 years later, all technologies come up, there's guns and stuff, and I shocked myself that I like this because I normally hate fantasy books with guns, but I love this. I just love Brandon Sanderson's writing style, I love his characters and the way he forms his characters. This investigation story is basically about some train robbers. So they get on trains and rob them in very mysterious and weird ways that people don't understand. Again, magic exists in this universe. It's all like allomancy, so metal's being used in magic to be able to use their powers, basically. And it's wonderful. I absolutely love it. I would highly, highly recommend Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series as well as these, which are technically in the Mistborn series. I do want to read the next one. I really like certain characters, especially Wayne. He is so funny. He makes me laugh all the way through the story. Basically, Wayne's a master of disguise. He can put voices on. He can make himself look like anything he wants to look like. For example, he does actually dress as an old woman at one point and pulls it off really well, and everybody believes that he's an old woman. It's just wonderful. I would highly recommend all of the books I read this month. I've had a really, really good reading month, so I'm so very, very proud of myself. I am trying to get there with my video making. I'm so sorry. It's just a lot of the time I feel really weak with my pregnancy, and it's just, everything's exhausting right now. I'm having one of my good days right now, baby's kicking strong, and I feel good today, so yay, I made a video. I will hopefully see you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Again, highly recommend these books. Go for it and read them. I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!